We are counting down the 10 outboard engine categories that have become rare and irreplaceable in today's market. From discontinued horsepower workhorses still in high demand, to legendary performance classics and the last of the regulation frozen giants, each entry reveals a unique mix of engineering, scarcity, and collector obsession. Which outboard type commands the hidden premiums, and why do owners regret selling? Let us begin the countdown with number 10. Discontinued horsepower classes like 35, 60, and 85 horsepower once filled a crucial gap for everyday boaters, but today they have quietly disappeared from new engine catalogs. Owners of classic fishing rigs, vintage runabouts, and older pontoons now face a problem that is rarely discussed. There is no modern drop in replacement for these exact horsepower brackets. The original hulls were engineered for a specific weight and transom footprint. If you swap in a heavier four-stroke or a mismatched powerhead, you risk upsetting balance, losing performance, or even voiding insurance. As manufacturers trim their lineups to meet emissions rules and to focus on high-volume models, these middleweight outboards became orphans. The result is a niche market where the right engine in the right size can command a quiet premium. Mechanics report that buyers will pay well above book value to avoid the cost and hassle of re-rigging an entire boat. For those who still own a clean running example from these lost classes, selling means giving up something that is nearly impossible to replace, no matter how much you spend on new technology. Hidden among the racks at old marinas and estate sales, some of the most overlooked outboards wear generic badges: Sears, Spiegel, Goodyear, Montgomery Ward. On the surface, these engines look like common budget motors, but a closer look reveals a secret history. Major manufacturers quietly built limited runs for department stores, sometimes adding exclusive carburetors, gear ratios, or unique paint codes. A Sea King or Brook Lure might hide a factory upgrade not found on its mainstream sibling, ordered for a holiday sale or a regional market. The catch is this: without the right paperwork, original sales receipts, catalog listings, or serial number guides, these differences vanish into obscurity. Collectors and restorers know the value of a matching serial prefix or a rare badge, especially when paired with period documentation. A few pages from a catalog of the 1960s or a faded registration slip can turn a plain-looking outboard into a prized survivor. In a market driven by provenance, originality trumps horsepower. Owners who dismiss these engines as disposable may be sitting on a hidden gem, their worth tied not to broad demand, but to the story told by their documentation and details. Long before digital controls and composite cowls, a quiet revolution unfolded in outboard engineering. The introduction of aluminum block performance outboards changed everything. By the late 1940s and 1950s, manufacturers had mastered sand casting and alloy blending, producing blocks that weighed a fraction of their cast iron rivals. These early aluminum motors, like those from Martin Mercury and select racing lines, delivered power-to-weight ratios that seemed impossible at the time. Special alloys and unique cooling passages let designers push compression and revolutions per minute higher than ever, all while keeping the engines light enough to lift with one hand. Obsolete tooling and lost casting techniques mean these blocks can never be reproduced in the same way. The result is a category of outboards prized for their mechanical purity and raw performance. Collectors hunt for original heads and blocks, chasing serial numbers and casting marks that prove authenticity. For those who know what to look for, a genuine aluminum block legend is not just a piece of history. It is a reminder of a time when metallurgy itself was the secret weapon. Selling one means giving up a kind of performance heritage that modern engines, no matter how advanced, simply cannot imitate. The arrival of electric start outboards in the late 1950s and early 1960s brought a new kind of complexity to the docks. Early adopters encountered engines with starter motors the size of coffee cans, reinforced crankshafts, and wiring looms that looked more at home in a car than a boat. Manufacturers, unsure how these new systems would hold up, built them with a level of caution that bordered on paranoia: extra thick brackets, oversized solenoids, and heavy-duty mounting plates. These first-generation electric starts often tipped the scales well above their manual counterparts, but the trade-off was clear: push-button convenience, even if it meant carrying a few extra pounds. Today, the real value in these transitional classics is not just the engine itself, but the completeness of the original electric system. Finding one with its full functioning starter assembly, period-correct battery cables, and uncut harnesses is rare. Many were stripped for parts or converted back to manual start as components failed and replacements became scarce. Collectors now hunt for untouched examples, knowing that a missing relay or vintage starter switch can turn a potential treasure into a restoration nightmare. It is the overbuilt nature of these early systems, the redundant grounds, the armored wiring, the cast aluminum starter housings that sets them apart. They represent a brief moment when manufacturers, experimenting with new technology, spared no expense to ensure reliability. For those who own a complete running first-generation electric start outboard, selling means giving up a piece of engineering history that is nearly impossible to reconstruct from scratch. On the edge of the collector world sits a category that rarely draws headlines but never loses its following: the classic commercial utility outboard. These engines were built for fish camps, rental fleets, and remote industrial use, designed from the start to run all day, every day for years on end. Heavy, slow-turning power heads, thick castings, and oversized cooling jackets set these workhorses apart from the lighter, flashier motors aimed at weekend boaters. Under plain gray or olive paint, they hide magneto ignitions and gear cases built to shrug off sand, logs, and salt water. In the 1960s and the 1970s, brands like Neptune, Gale, and Sport King shipped thousands of these units to logging camps in Canada, gold operations in Alaska, and fishing villages across Africa and Southeast Asia. Some are still running decades after their first start, with only basic hand tool maintenance. Demand for these outboards never really faded. As modern engines grew more complex and parts for commercial two-stroke engines became scarce, a thriving gray market developed. Exporters quietly buy up serviceable old units in North America, refurbish them, and ship them overseas where reliability is life or death. Mechanics prize the thick cylinder walls and simple fuel systems. These engines can be rebuilt on a dock with a socket set and a can of oil. For owners, selling a true industrial-grade classic means losing access to a kind of durability and field service simplicity that is nearly impossible to find in modern production. Their value is not in looks or speed, but in the promise of another 1,000 hours, no questions asked. A small twin-cylinder outboard built between the late 1940s and the 1970s can outlast almost anything else on the dock. These engines, usually in the 7.5 to 18 horsepower range, became famous for starting on the first pull even after months of sitting under a tarp. Owners learned early that nearly every part could be replaced or rebuilt with basic tools. The power head lifts off with a handful of bolts. Carburetors, water pumps, and ignition points are all accessible without special equipment. That simple accessibility turned repair into routine. The 1949 Johnson Seahorse set the template. Recoil starter, removable cowling, a simple forward, neutral, reverse gear shift, and a magneto ignition that shrugs off moisture and bad fuel. Later models added CDI ignition for even more reliable spark. Mechanics still trade stories of these engines running after decades of hard use, sometimes on their third or fourth overhaul. Manuals and parts diagrams are everywhere, thanks to a global community of tinkerers who keep these classics alive. For many, the appeal is as much about independence as nostalgia. Owning one means never waiting for a dealer or hunting for a proprietary scan tool. If something breaks, you fix it yourself. That is why these twins are not just collectible. They are practical treasures, valued by everyone from cottage owners to backwoods guides. Selling one is giving up a piece of mechanical freedom that modern engines cannot replace. On race weekends in the late 1950s and early 1960s, the docks echoed with the metallic bark of tuned exhausts and the sharp scent of high-octane fuel. These were not ordinary outboards. Silver Age racing powerheads, built in numbered batches and tracked by serial registries, set the standard for what small block performance could achieve on water. Each engine carried its own story, some with hand-stamped plates, others with faded logbook entries connecting them to legendary regattas or regional speed records. The engineering behind these machines was uncompromising. High-compression heads squeezed every ounce of power from compact cylinders, while hydrodynamic lower units sliced through the water with a precision that production motors could not match. Manufacturers experimented with bespoke porting, exotic alloys, and custom gear ratios, all in pursuit of a few extra miles per hour. Unlike mass-market models, these racing outboards were often assembled by specialist teams, sometimes in single-digit runs, making documentation and provenance as important as horsepower. Collectors and museum curators still hunt for engines with unbroken chains of ownership, original inspection tags, or period race decals. For many, the real value lies not just in raw performance, but in the cultural cachet, each serial number a passport to a vanished era of speed. Selling a genuine vintage racing outboard means giving up more than a machine. It is letting go of a piece of history that cannot be recreated, only preserved. Direct injection two-strokes arrived with promises that sounded almost too good to be true. Cleaner emissions, instant throttle, and the muscle of classic two-strokes, all managed by a computer brain. For a few years, engines like the Evinrude Ficht and later E-Tech models stood at the cutting edge, sold on the idea that boaters could go 3 years without a dealer service call. Early ads boasted 300-hour maintenance intervals and whisper-quiet idling. But under the cowling, these engines hid a fragile secret: proprietary injectors and electronics that no independent shop could touch. When the Outboard Marine Corporation collapsed in 2000 after a wave of warranty crises, and Bombardier Recreational Products shuttered Evinrude outboards for good in 2020, owners found themselves holding orphan technology. Suddenly, the only source for crucial parts, injectors, electronic control units, and control modules, was gone. The paradox is clear: these engines are both advanced and endangered. Their performance and efficiency still outshine many modern four-strokes, but a single failed injector or fried control board can turn a running legend into a paperweight. Mechanics hoard spare parts, and online forums trade tips for reviving dead modules, but the supply shrinks every year. Some owners report waiting over 3 years for dealer service, or paying a premium for used components scavenged from scrapped motors. The scarcity has driven a quiet obsession. Those who own a running original direct injection two-stroke are reluctant to let go, knowing that the next failure could be the last. In a market shaped by regulation and corporate exits, these engines have become a cautionary tale of high-tech promise and the risks of being left behind by progress. Selling one now means giving up a rare combination of performance and history that no new engine can truly replace. Beneath the surface of the outboard world lies a secret that only veteran mechanics and hardcore anglers truly appreciate: the bulletproof lower unit. In the 1980s and the 1990s, as horsepower climbed and boats got faster, manufacturers responded with a level of over-engineering that would be unthinkable today. Gear cases from this era, especially those fitted to high-output two-stroke engines and saltwater workhorses, were built around thick castings and hardened steel gears. Every component, from the clutch dog to the propeller shaft, was designed to outlast the rest of the engine. Internal walls were measured in millimeters, not fractions of a millimeter as in modern units. The metallurgy alone set these lowers apart. Specialty alloys, deep case hardening, and oversized bearings meant they could shrug off groundings, debris, and thousands of hours at wide open throttle. By the late 1990s, cost-cutting memos circulated behind closed doors, mandating thinner castings and more compact gear sets. As the price of materials and labor rose, and as emissions regulations forced manufacturers to chase lighter weight and tighter margins, the era of the overbuilt lower quietly ended. The last true bulletproof lowers rolled off the line just as digital controls and composite cowls took over the market. Mechanics who serviced these units knew the difference, and one mechanic called them the last lowers you would ever need. Today, the presence of an original heavy-duty gear case can double the value of a classic outboard. Commercial operators hunt for them at auctions, willing to pay a premium for a part that can survive years of abuse. Collectors swap stories of finding thick-walled cases at estate sales, knowing that a single authentic lower can keep an engine running long after modern replacements have failed. Selling one is not just giving up a part, it is giving up a piece of mechanical insurance, forged in an era when longevity mattered more than cost. In the shadow of every marina storage rack, there is a legend that has only grown louder with time. It begins with the Pre-EPA, high horsepower, carbureted two-stroke, those V-block engines in the 150 to 200 horsepower range. They were the last of their kind. They were built before the 2006 emissions cutoff that drew a hard line between what could and could not be sold new in the United States. It was not just a regulatory footnote. When EPA and CARB rules landed, production of these powerhouses stopped overnight. Dealers scrambled to buy up the last shipments, knowing there would never be another run. What makes these outboards untouchable is not just nostalgia. It is torque, the kind that slams a hull onto plane in seconds, the kind that modern four strokes, weighed down by emissions hardware and digital controls, still cannot match pound for pound. The classic carbureted V6 engines from Mercury, Yamaha, Johnson, and Evinrude delivered a raw mechanical rush that became the signature of base tournaments, offshore races, and high-speed lake runs. Mechanics still talk about the simplicity. A handful of tools and a rebuilt carburetor and these engines would roar back to life after years in the weeds. But the EPA final deadline in 2006 made the supply finite. No new units, no legal workarounds, just the existing fleet, shrinking every year through wear, accidents, or local bans. Scarcity turned to obsession. Auction sites and private sales now see clean original examples trading hands for $7,000 to $12,000, sometimes double or triple what they fetched a decade ago. A seller who let go of a mint 150 horsepower engine in 2012 for $1,000 might find the same engine today commanded nearly 10 times that. One longtime owner called it his biggest mistake. You cannot find them, and nothing else runs like it. I would double that cash now to get it back. Stories of regret are everywhere. Some recall entire crates of running engines sent to scrap under manufacturer rebate programs, traded for a discount on new four strokes. Collectors watched in disbelief as blocks that could have run another decade were destroyed for pennies. Today, each survivor is more than a machine. It is a forbidden artifact, a piece of outlaw engineering that regulation made priceless. The last of the carbureted V-block engines stand alone at the top of the never-sell list, not just for their unmatched performance, but for the certainty that when they are gone for good. Across all 10 iconic outboards, one truth emerges. True value is not measured only in horsepower, but in engineering that endures beyond trends and regulations. These engines survive because they meet real-world needs that modern technology cannot always replace. Their rarity is not nostalgia. It is proof that lasting design becomes priceless when progress leaves utility behind. In today's market, what is irreplaceable is never truly obsolete.